I had been planning this hike for months, carefully choosing a route that would push me but not overwhelm me. The trail started in a dense, forested area, known for its rugged terrain and steep inclines, far from the comfort of paved roads and cell service. I packed light but carefully: a tent, a sleeping bag, a first aid kit, water filtration supplies, extra food, a compass, and a small emergency stove. I had a basic map, though I relied mostly on memory from prior research. I liked the feeling of being immersed in the wilderness, but I also knew it demanded respect. The first day of hiking was invigorating. The forest was alive with sound: the rustle of small animals through leaves, the chatter of birds, the wind threading through the trees. The trail was narrow and steep in places, but manageable. I was in good shape and moved steadily, taking short breaks to drink water and observe my surroundings. The sun was warm on my back, and I felt a thrill in the quiet solitude, a sense that this was exactly where I belonged. I wasn't afraid, only alert. I had trained for this. By late afternoon, I had reached a ridge that offered a view of the valley below. I stopped to rest and eat a small lunch. From this height, I could see the winding trail stretching far into the forest, tiny breaks in the canopy marking streams and rock formations. I took a moment to note my bearings, making sure I knew which direction to continue. Everything seemed perfect. The air smelled of pine and damp earth. I felt energized and careful, fully aware of the potential dangers: slips, fatigue, unexpected weather, or wildlife encounters. But none of that had materialized yet. I packed up my things and pressed on, eager to reach the campsite I had planned near a small creek further along the trail. As I descended the ridge, the forest began to change. The trees grew taller and denser, and the underbrush thickened. The trail became harder to follow. I relied heavily on the map and my compass, occasionally marking landmarks to ensure I wouldn't lose my way. I spotted animal tracks, likely deer or elk, and small claw marks on trees from bears or other wildlife. I wasn't concerned yet, but I kept my backpack strapped snug, my knife easily accessible, and my senses sharp. The trail meandered along a rocky hillside, occasionally disappearing into dense shrubs, forcing me to step carefully over roots and fallen branches. By late afternoon, the sky had begun to gray with thick clouds rolling in from the west. A storm was coming. I didn't panic. I had prepared for rain. I reached the creek and set up camp on a flat area near a stand of trees that would provide some shelter from the wind and rain. I collected wood, set up my small stove, and filtered water from the creek for drinking. The rain came quickly and heavily, drumming against my tent with a relentless rhythm. I felt a mix of satisfaction and unease. The forest was beautiful and alive, but it demanded attention. The storm lasted well into the night, and I listened to the wind tearing through the trees, the branches swaying violently, and the water rushing down the creek. Sleep was difficult, but eventually I drifted off, feeling tired but prepared. Morning came with an eerie calm. The storm had passed, but the forest was saturated with water. Mud clung to my boots, and the trail was slick and treacherous. I moved cautiously, aware that a single misstep could send me tumbling down the hillside. I noticed that some of the fallen branches had broken further down the slope during the storm, creating new obstacles. My progress was slower than anticipated, but I felt determined. I wanted to reach the next planned campsite by evening. As I climbed higher, the trail became less defined. I had been following a small stream, a natural guide, but in several places the water had altered its path during the storm. The ground was uneven, slippery, and covered in wet leaves. My feet sank into soft soil, and I carefully tested every step before putting my full weight down. At one point, a large tree had fallen across the trail, forcing me to navigate around it. I climbed over thick roots and jagged bark, feeling the strain in my arms and legs. My mind remained alert. The forest around me was quiet, almost unnervingly so. Birds had disappeared, and the occasional rustle of small animals seemed louder than usual. I felt a creeping sense of isolation, a weight pressing on me, reminding me that I was alone, far from anyone who could help. Around midday, I reached a small clearing. The sky above was still gray, and puddles reflected the dim light. I stopped to rest and eat, taking in my surroundings. That's when I noticed something odd. Tire tracks in the mud, faint but unmistakable, heading off the trail into the forest. They were fresh, not more than a day old. My stomach tightened. I had expected solitude, not signs that others were nearby. I felt an uneasy awareness of the possibility that someone else was in the area, unaccounted for, possibly watching. I rationalized that it could be park rangers or another hiker, but the tracks did not match anything I had seen before. No footprints, just tire marks, leading into thick underbrush. The forest swallowed them almost immediately, leaving no clear continuation. I made a mental note, but tried to shake off the tension. I didn't want fear to cloud my judgment. The trail soon narrowed again, with steep inclines and moss-covered rocks. I slipped once, barely catching myself on a tree root, my heart racing. The adrenaline made me move faster, but I reminded myself to slow down and focus on steady steps. By late afternoon, I reached a ridge that overlooked a wide, open valley. From here, I could see the next stretch of trail weaving through the forest below. My plan was to descend into the valley and follow the creek further to reach the second campsite. As I moved along the ridge, I noticed fresh deer tracks. Nothing threatening, just a reminder that I was sharing this space with wild animals. The air was cool and damp, the clouds still heavy above. As I descended into the valley, the ground became muddy, and small streams of water ran across the trail. The terrain was uneven, with rocks hidden beneath the mud. I had to pick my steps carefully, balancing myself with a hiking pole and relying on my boots' grip. I was careful not to make sudden movements. At one point, I heard the distant sound of snapping branches, not close, but noticeable. My pulse quickened. I paused, scanning the forest. Nothing. It could have been a deer, a falling branch, or just the echo of the wind. I tried to remain calm, reminding myself that I had experienced this kind of isolation before. Still, a gnawing sense of caution took hold. I quickened my pace, hoping to reach the campsite before dark. By evening, I realized I had underestimated the difficulty of the terrain. The creek had swollen slightly from the storm, and I had to carefully navigate crossing points where rocks were slippery and the current deceptively strong. My boots were soaked, my socks wet, and my muscles tired. I considered stopping for the night, but there was no suitable flat area immediately near the creek. I pushed on, keeping a mental note of potential campsites, scanning for clearings or flat areas that could provide some shelter. The forest was thick, and the fading light made it harder to judge distance and obstacles. Shadows grew longer, creating the illusion of movement where there was none. As dusk fell, I finally spotted a small flat area that could serve as a temporary camp. I quickly set up my tent, aware that the temperature would drop sharply once the sun disappeared. I gathered dry wood from nearby fallen branches and managed to light my stove to prepare a small meal. The forest around me was silent, almost suffocatingly so. There were no birds, no rustling of animals, only the faint sound of the creek flowing nearby. I felt the familiar mix of relief and anxiety that comes with finding shelter in the wilderness. I checked my map and compass several times, ensuring I was on course and noting the position of landmarks for the morning. Night brought a new level of tension. The forest, already foreboding, became oppressive in the darkness. Every sound was amplified: the dripping of water from leaves, the distant call of an owl, the movement of small animals through the underbrush. I slept lightly, constantly waking at minor noises. At one point, I woke to a loud crack, like a branch breaking under weight, somewhere close by. I remained still, listening intently. Nothing moved after that, but the sense of being watched lingered. I reminded myself that I was alone, isolated, but I had experience and skills. I checked my supplies again and prepared for an early start. Morning light brought some relief. The forest looked less threatening in daylight, though still challenging. My boots were dry thanks to a layer of grass I had packed into the tent, and my energy, though depleted, was enough to continue. I followed the creek carefully, moving slowly over the slick rocks, avoiding hidden holes in the muddy banks. The terrain remained rugged, with sudden drops and loose soil in some areas. By midday, I encountered another strange sign. A partially collapsed structure, something like an abandoned hunting shack, barely visible under years of overgrowth. It looked abandoned, no signs of recent human presence. Still, it was unsettling. I made a note of its location, deciding not to investigate too closely, and continued on the trail, keeping my mind focused on reaching the main trailhead. The place was a relic, long abandoned. The asphalt was cracked, weeds sprouting through the gaps. The gas pumps were rusted skeletons, the roof of the station sagged, and the building itself looked like it could collapse in a strong wind, perfect for hiding or disappearing. I slowed the truck, trying to act casual, even though my hands were trembling. I parked near the edge of the lot, out of sight from the road, and shut off the engine. Silence fell, broken only by the rain and the occasional splash of water from puddles. I sat there, heart pounding, eyes scanning the lot. The SUV pulled in behind me, headlights cutting the darkness, stopping a few car lengths away. No one got out. I watched it, every nerve on edge. Minutes passed, each one stretching longer than the last. My brain raced through possibilities: robbers, some crazed person, maybe even a setup. I reached under the seat for my flashlight and a heavy wrench I kept for emergencies, feeling the cold metal in my hand. I had an idea. I needed a clear plan to get out of there without confrontation. I decided I would wait for the rain to let up, and then I'd make a run for the highway, using the truck size to my advantage. But the rain didn't let up. It intensified. My hands were slippery on the wheel as I restarted the engine. I eased the truck forward, inching toward the lot exit. The SUV followed, mirroring every move. I pressed on the accelerator, carefully keeping the wheels on the asphalt, avoiding the puddles that could cause hydroplaning. The SUV accelerated too, keeping pace. My heart felt like it would explode. Then, out of nowhere, a deer, or maybe two, leapt onto the road in front of me. I slammed on the brakes, swerving slightly to avoid hitting them. The truck fishtailed, and I gripped the wheel with all my strength. Tires screeched on wet pavement. The SUV behind me did the same, but with less control. The moment of chaos gave me an idea. I veered sharply toward the edge of the lot, down a narrow service road I had noticed on my approach. It was overgrown, barely wide enough for my truck, but it led back to the highway a mile or so down. I took it, tires crunching on gravel and broken asphalt. The SUV hesitated at the turn, slowing. I didn't look back. I just drove, pushing the truck to the limits, engine roaring, rain blurring the windshield. After what felt like an eternity, I emerged back onto a secondary road that eventually led to a major highway. The SUV was gone. I couldn't see it anywhere, no headlights, nothing. Adrenaline kept me alert as I drove the rest of the way to my destination, eyes constantly scanning mirrors and shadows. By the time I reached the delivery warehouse, the sun was just starting to rise. Exhausted, soaked, and still shaking, I parked and shut off the engine. No one had followed me all the way there. I called the local police to report the incident, giving a description of the SUV and the route. They noted it, promised patrols, but there were no guarantees. I never saw that vehicle again, and I never learned who had been following me that night. But I did learn something about myself, about survival, instinct, and the thin line between routine and danger on the open road. That night stayed with me. For weeks afterward, every shadow on a highway, every vehicle in my mirrors made my heart skip a beat. It taught me vigilance, and more importantly, it reminded me that sometimes the most terrifying things are the ones with no explanation. Life on the road is dangerous enough without adding unknown threats. And that night, I realized just how quickly ordinary hours behind the wheel can turn into a fight for your life. I still drive long hauls, still face storms, isolation, and the quiet threat of accident or exhaustion. But I carry that night with me, a reminder that in the darkness, you can never assume safety, and that sometimes the only thing between you and disaster is your own instincts and the courage to act on them. I had been driving trucks for over 15 years, long enough to know every turn, every bump, and every shadow on the highways that ran through the empty stretches of America. I had hauled loads in every state, during the day and through the darkest nights, and I had seen some things that unsettled even a man like me, who thought he had grown used to solitude and danger. But nothing in my years of trucking could have prepared me for the night that started like any other and ended with the kind of fear that burrows into your bones. It began with a late load heading south. I had picked up a shipment of industrial equipment from a small warehouse outside of Des Moines. The dispatcher had told me it was urgent, and the deadline was tight. I had been running a long string of back-to-back deliveries and was tired, but the pay was good, and I knew I couldn't afford to turn it down. I had planned my route carefully, highway mostly, with a few stretches of rural roads that would cut travel time. The weather had been clear, the roads dry, and my truck was running smoothly. The first few hours were nothing unusual. I kept my eyes on the road, my hands firm on the wheel, and the engine's hum was the only company I had. At night, the highway feels like a tunnel. Headlights slice through the darkness, and everything beyond is swallowed by black. I liked it that way most of the time, kept me focused. But that night, the darkness had a different feel, like it was heavier, pressing against the truck from all sides. I shook the thought off, telling myself it was just fatigue, and kept driving. About 4 hours into the drive, somewhere past the small towns that dotted the edge of Nebraska, I noticed a vehicle in my mirrors. A black SUV, its headlights dim, pacing me at a distance. I had seen tailing vehicles before, usually someone driving cautiously behind a truck. But this was different. It stayed at the same distance for miles, never closing in, never falling back. I glanced at it through the rearview mirror, catching a glimpse of the tinted windows. I couldn't see anyone inside, but the feeling of being watched settled deep in my chest. I adjusted my speed, tried moving a lane over when the road allowed it, but the SUV mirrored every move. At first, I thought maybe it was coincidence. A nervous driver keeping distance on a dark highway, but the longer it stayed there, the more certain I became that it was following me. My mind raced with possibilities, none of them good. Truckers get used to dealing with tailgaters and erratic drivers, but the thought of someone intentionally following you in the middle of nowhere is different. Puts you on edge in a way that makes every mile feel longer. I considered stopping at the next rest area, but there was nothing in sight for another 50 miles. My eyes kept darting to the rearview mirror. The SUV didn't change lanes, didn't pass me, it just stayed there, constant, silent. I tightened my grip on the wheel, feeling a cold sweat run down my spine. I switched the CB radio on, hoping to hear some other trucks in the area, maybe just to break the isolation. Static crackled, then a voice, low and distant, reporting a truck broken down a few exits ahead. Nothing relevant. I kept driving. My mind tried to rationalize. Maybe it was someone just out for a long drive, maybe they were lost. But deep down, I knew better. I have an instinct for danger that years of late-night hauling sharpened, and that instinct screamed that I was being followed. Then came the rain. It started as a drizzle, barely noticeable against the windshield. Within minutes, it turned into a downpour, sheets of water hammering against the glass, and visibility dropped to near zero. My wipers struggled to keep up, and my headlights reflected off the wet asphalt, making it hard to see the lines on the road. The highway stretched ahead like a silver snake, twisting through the hills in a blur of darkness and rain. The SUV was still there, following, persistent, like it had chosen me and wouldn't let go. I called my dispatcher on the CB, trying to sound calm, asking if there were any known roadblocks or police activity ahead. Nothing, just the static and distant chatter of other truckers. I kept my speed steady, not too fast, not too slow, keeping in mind the slick road conditions. I knew that any mistake here could be fatal, and yet I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being herded, that someone was deliberately driving me somewhere. Hours passed, or maybe it was minutes. Time seemed warped on that dark, wet highway. Then I saw the exit sign, a small, dimly lit turnoff that led to an abandoned rest stop. My first instinct was to avoid it. There was nothing there, but the SUV's headlights flicked in a way that suggested it was following me onto the exit. Panic rose in my chest. I had to make a decision, pull into the rest stop and confront the unknown, or keep going and risk being followed for miles into even darker, emptier territory. I chose the rest stop. The road started winding upward, climbing into a hill. I noticed the headlights of the mysterious car reappear, now in the distance behind me. I tried to ignore it, focusing on the lines of the road. The hill made me slow down, the engine straining under the load. That's when I saw the sign, sharp curves next 5 miles. I cursed under my breath. This road was barely wide enough for one truck, let alone with fog, ice patches, and a potential tail. Halfway up the hill, my heart almost stopped. On the road, in the thick fog, I saw the figure again. This time unmistakable. A person, standing in the middle of the lane, arms outstretched. I slammed the brakes, tires skidding slightly on the wet asphalt. The trailer swayed. I hit the horn repeatedly, panicked, trying to make the figure move. Nothing. The fog made it hard to tell, but the figure looked like a man, wearing a dark coat, completely still. My stomach churned. There was no shoulder to swerve onto, no escape. Instinct kicked in. I eased the wheel to the left, heart racing, praying my tires would hold. The figure didn't move. I braced for impact, and then it happened. The figure vanished. Just like that, gone. My heart pounded in my chest. I couldn't stop shaking. I looked in the mirrors, saw the car again in the distance, far behind me now. Somehow it had slowed, or maybe I had. I didn't know anymore. The fog was thick enough that everything could have been an illusion. The next stretch was worse. The road narrowed further, the asphalt crumbling in patches, the guardrails rusted and broken. I had to focus entirely on the road, on keeping the rig steady. Every curve felt like it could be my last. I started calculating in my head how far it was to the next town, trying to reassure myself. I'd been driving trucks for nearly 20 years, seen wrecks, storms, near misses. I knew this road could kill me if I wasn't careful. Hours passed, or maybe it was minutes. Time became meaningless in the fog. My eyes burned from constant focus. My hands cramped from gripping the wheel so tight. I was soaked in sweat, though the night air was cold, damp, and suffocating. Every sound was amplified. The rumble of my engine, the creak of the trailer, the occasional snap of branches from the trees brushing the edges of the road. The fog started to lift slightly, giving me more visibility, but the tension never left. Eventually, I saw lights in the distance. A gas station, a diner, something human, something solid, a sign that I was nearing civilization. Relief flooded me, and my shoulders relaxed slightly. I pulled off the road carefully, making sure the trailer cleared the narrow shoulder. The lights seemed unreal, comforting in their normality. I parked the rig, left it running, and stepped outside for the first time in hours. The air felt different here, safer somehow. I walked to the small diner next to the gas station. Lights on, a few cars in the lot, a sense of life returning. I poured a cup of coffee and just sat, trembling, thinking about the night. Every detail replayed in my mind. The fog, the figure, the car behind me, the thumping in the trailer. But here, in the safety of lights and people, I could breathe again. I called my dispatcher, told him I'd be delayed, and stayed until dawn. By morning, the memory of the night's fear felt distant but real. The road behind me looked normal, even mundane, in daylight. No fog, no strange car, no figure. The trailer perfectly intact. The only thing that lingered was the knowledge that some roads carry dangers that don't come with warning signs or obvious causes. I left the diner, refueled, and drove the remaining miles to my destination with careful, measured attention. The rest of the journey was uneventful. The early sun painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, the landscape reassuring and ordinary. When I finally delivered the load and parked my rig at the warehouse, I felt the tension in my body begin to ease. I knew I would always remember that night, the fear of the unknown on a deserted road. But I also knew something else. I survived because I stayed alert, because I made careful decisions under pressure, and because I refused to let panic take control. In a job like mine, fear is part of the road. It's not about ignoring it, It's about using it to stay alive. I left the warehouse that evening, empty truck, long day behind me, feeling a quiet satisfaction. The night I had survived didn't break me. It reminded me that some roads are dangerous, not because of ghosts or myths, but because of reality itself. Fog, isolation, other people's choices, and the fine line between control and chaos. And as I drove home, I realized that the most important thing I could carry on those roads wasn't just skill or experience, but vigilance, patience, and respect for what the night could throw at me. The memory of the fog, the figure, and that silent, tailing car would always linger, but it became a lesson rather than a terror. And in the long run, surviving nights like that, coming out at the other end, feeling the sun, the warmth, the reassurance of ordinary life, it was enough. I made it through, intact, and I knew I could handle whatever came next on the road. I had been driving long enough to know that some nights on the road had a weight to them that wasn't just about fatigue or the hours spent behind the wheel. I learned to notice it, the kind of heaviness that clung to the cab of my truck, a tension in the air that made every sound sharper, every shadow deeper. That night, I felt it as soon as I turned off the highway onto the narrow, two-lane road that cut through the forests of northern Pennsylvania. My rig was loaded with frozen goods, mostly vegetables and meat, bound for a small town in upstate New York. The shipment wasn't urgent, but schedules don't really matter when you're a trucker. You move when you can, and you drive until your body forces you to stop. I remember it started with the fog. It rolled in suddenly, like someone had pulled a thick, gray blanket across the trees and the road. I could see maybe 20 feet ahead, maybe less in some patches. The highway I had been on gave way to this back road that curved through valleys and old timberlands. The white lines on the asphalt were barely visible, the reflectors glinting dimly in the low beams of my headlights. I slowed down, careful not to ride the brakes too hard on the slick surface. My rig responded sluggishly, the tires on the trailer whispering across the wet asphalt. Hours earlier, I had stopped at a small rest area to stretch. I grabbed a coffee from the vending machine, feeling that bitter, burnt taste burn its way down my throat, and then climbed back into the cab. I remember checking the mirrors, checking the tires again. Everything was fine, but the road I chose after that, I can't explain why I did it, felt wrong the moment I saw it. The GPS indicated a shortcut, a way to shave off maybe 20 miles. I ignored the niggling voice in my head that screamed this was a bad idea. The fog grew thicker as I drove. I noticed the first sign of trouble when I thought I saw a figure on the side of the road. At first, I thought it was a person, maybe a hitchhiker, standing frozen at the edge of the trees. My heart rate jumped, the way it always did when I saw something on a lonely road that shouldn't be there. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, and looked again. Nothing. Just the trees, the fog, the faint glint of my headlights on the wet asphalt. I shrugged it off, muttering to myself that it was just a trick of the light, a shadow of the fog. The road narrowed even more. There were no streetlights, no houses, no other vehicles. The asphalt had cracks filled with water, and as I went over them, the trailer shuddered. I checked the gauges, temperature, oil pressure, brakes, all normal. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, feeling the pulse in my hands, the tension climbing. That's when I noticed something odd in the rearview mirror. A car. At first, I thought it was a delivery vehicle or maybe a local driving late, but it was odd because it stayed too close, too still. Normally, cars either pull ahead or fall back on roads like this. Not this one. It matched my speed exactly, keeping pace. I tried to shake it off, telling myself it didn't matter. But then it happened. Out of nowhere, the car's headlights flicked off. Total darkness behind me. My chest tightened. I could feel the hair on my arms stand up. I know that sound, the one that comes with panic in your stomach, when every nerve is screaming, when instinct tells you something is very wrong. I slowed down slightly, just to see if it would pass me. But the darkness remained. The fog seemed to close in tighter, muffling everything except the rumble of my engine and the soft slap of tires on wet asphalt. I pulled over cautiously, far enough to the side to let anyone or anything pass. Nothing. No lights. No sound. Just the fog, the trees, the road stretching endlessly ahead. I waited, my eyes strained in the low beams. My hands tightened around the wheel, knuckles white. That's when I heard it. A soft thump from the trailer. Not the kind you hear when cargo shifts slightly, but a deliberate rhythmic thump, as if someone or something was tapping against the side. My stomach lurched. I checked the mirrors again. Nothing. No one around. Just the fog. I decided I had to keep moving. Stopping out here wasn't safe. Not in this isolation. I eased back onto the road, the fog swallowing me almost immediately. The thumping continued, now accompanied by a faint scraping sound. I checked the load. Everything seemed in place. Boxes stacked neatly, frozen food still secure. The sound didn't make sense. Nothing could move inside the trailer like that. My mind started spinning with possibilities, each worse than the last. I had been driving long enough to know that some nights on the road had a weight to them that wasn't just about fatigue or the hours spent behind the wheel. I learned to notice it, the kind of heaviness that clung to the cab of my truck, a tension in the air that made every sound sharper, every shadow deeper. That night, I felt it as soon as I turned off the highway onto the narrow, two-lane road that cut through the forests of northern Pennsylvania. My rig was loaded with frozen goods, mostly vegetables and meat, bound for a small town in upstate New York. The shipment wasn't urgent, but schedules don't really matter when you're a trucker. You move when you can, and you drive until your body forces you to stop. I remember it started with the fog. It rolled in suddenly, like someone had pulled a thick, gray blanket across the trees and the road. I could see maybe 20 feet ahead, maybe less in some patches. The highway I had been on gave way to this back road that curved through valleys and old timberlands. The white lines on the asphalt were barely visible, the reflectors glinting dimly in the low beams of my headlights. I slowed down, careful not to ride the brakes too hard on the slick surface. My rig responded sluggishly, the tires on the trailer whispering across the wet asphalt. Hours earlier, I had stopped at a small rest area to stretch. I grabbed a coffee from the vending machine, feeling that bitter, burnt taste burn its way down my throat, and then climbed back into the cab. I remember checking the mirrors, checking the tires again. Everything was fine, but the road I chose after that, I can't explain why I did it, felt wrong the moment I saw it. The GPS indicated a shortcut, a way to shave off maybe 20 miles. I ignored the niggling voice in my head that screamed this was a bad idea. The fog grew thicker as I drove. I noticed the first sign of trouble when I thought I saw a figure on the side of the road. At first, I thought it was a person, maybe a hitchhiker, standing frozen at the edge of the trees. My heart rate jumped, the way it always did when I saw something on a lonely road that shouldn't be there. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, and looked again. Nothing. Just the trees, the fog, the faint glint of my headlights on the wet asphalt. I shrugged it off, muttering to myself that it was just a trick of the light, a shadow of the fog. The road narrowed even more. There were no streetlights, no houses, no other vehicles. The asphalt had cracks filled with water, and as I went over them, the trailer shuddered. I checked the gauges, temperature, oil pressure, brakes, all normal. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, feeling the pulse in my hands, the tension climbing. That's when I noticed something odd in the rearview mirror. A car. At first, I thought it was a delivery vehicle or maybe a local driving late, but it was odd because it stayed too close, too still. Normally, cars either pull ahead or fall back on roads like this. Not this one. It matched my speed exactly, keeping pace. I tried to shake it off, telling myself it didn't matter. But then it happened. Out of nowhere, the car's headlights flicked off. Total darkness behind me. My chest tightened. I could feel the hair on my arms stand up. I know that sound, the one that comes with panic in your stomach, when every nerve is screaming, when instinct tells you something is very wrong. I slowed down slightly, just to see if it would pass me. But the darkness remained. The fog seemed to close in tighter, muffling everything except the rumble of my engine and the soft slap of tires on wet asphalt. I pulled over cautiously, far enough to the side to let anyone or anything pass. Nothing. No lights. No sound. Just the fog, the trees, the road stretching endlessly ahead. I waited, my eyes strained in the low beams. My hands tightened around the wheel, knuckles white. That's when I heard it. A soft thump from the trailer. Not the kind you hear when cargo shifts slightly, but a deliberate rhythmic thump, as if someone or something was tapping against the side. My stomach lurched. I checked the mirrors again. Nothing. No one around. Just the fog. I decided I had to keep moving. Stopping out here wasn't safe. Not in this isolation. I eased back onto the road, the fog swallowing me almost immediately. The thumping continued, now accompanied by a faint scraping sound. I checked the load. Everything seemed in place. Boxes stacked neatly, frozen food still secure. The sound didn't make sense. Nothing could move inside the trailer like that. My mind started spinning with possibilities, each worse than the last. I had been driving long enough to know that some nights on the road had a weight to them that wasn't just about fatigue or the hours spent behind the wheel. I learned to notice it, the kind of heaviness that clung to the cab of my truck. A tension in the air that made every sound sharper, every shadow deeper. That night, I felt it as soon as I turned off the highway onto the narrow, two-lane road that cut through the forests of northern Pennsylvania. My rig was loaded with frozen goods, mostly vegetables and meat, bound for a small town in upstate New York. The shipment wasn't urgent, but schedules don't really matter when you're a trucker. You move when you can, and you drive until your body forces you to stop. I remember it started with the fog. It rolled in suddenly, like someone had pulled a thick, gray blanket across the trees and the road. I could see maybe 20 feet ahead, maybe less in some patches. The highway I had been on gave way to this back road that curved through valleys and old timberlands. The white lines on the asphalt were barely visible, the reflectors glinting dimly in the low beams of my headlights. I slowed down, careful not to ride the brakes too hard on the slick surface. My rig responded sluggishly, the tires on the trailer whispering across the wet asphalt. Hours earlier, I had stopped at a small rest area to stretch. I grabbed a coffee from the vending machine, feeling that bitter, burnt taste burn its way down my throat, and then climbed back into the cab. I remember checking the mirrors, checking the tires again. Everything was fine, but the road I chose after that, I can't explain why I did it, felt wrong the moment I saw it. The GPS indicated a shortcut, a way to shave off maybe 20 miles. I ignored the niggling voice in my head that screamed this was a bad idea. The fog grew thicker as I drove. I noticed the first sign of trouble when I thought I saw a figure on the side of the road. At first, I thought it was a person, maybe a hitchhiker, standing frozen at the edge of the trees. My heart rate jumped, the way it always did when I saw something on a lonely road that shouldn't be there. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, and looked again. Nothing. Just the trees, the fog, the faint glint of my headlights on the wet asphalt. I shrugged it off, muttering to myself that it was just a trick of the light, a shadow of the fog. The road narrowed even more. There were no streetlights, no houses, no other vehicles. The asphalt had cracks filled with water, and as I went over them, the trailer shuddered. I checked the gauges, temperature, oil pressure, brakes, all normal. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, feeling the pulse in my hands, the tension climbing. That's when I noticed something odd in the rearview mirror. A car. At first, I thought it was a delivery vehicle or maybe a local driving late, but it was odd because it stayed too close, too still. Normally, cars either pull ahead or fall back on roads like this. Not this one. It matched my speed exactly, keeping pace. I tried to shake it off, telling myself it didn't matter. But then it happened. Out of nowhere, the car's headlights flicked off. Total darkness behind me. My chest tightened. I could feel the hair on my arms stand up. I know that sound, the one that comes with panic in your stomach, when every nerve is screaming, when instinct tells you something is very wrong. I slowed down slightly, just to see if it would pass me, but the darkness remained. The fog seemed to close in tighter, muffling everything except the rumble of my engine and the soft slap of tires on wet asphalt. I pulled over cautiously, far enough to the side to let anyone or anything pass. Nothing. No lights, no sound. Just the fog, the trees, the road stretching endlessly ahead. I waited, my eyes strained in the low beams. My hands tightened around the wheel, knuckles white. That's when I heard it. A soft thump from the trailer. Not the kind you hear when cargo shifts slightly, but a deliberate rhythmic thump, as if someone or something was tapping against the side. My stomach lurched. I checked the mirrors again. Nothing. No one around. Just the fog. I decided I had to keep moving. Stopping out here wasn't safe. Not in this isolation. I eased back onto the road, the fog swallowing me almost immediately. The thumping continued, now accompanied by a faint scraping sound. I checked the load. Everything seemed in place. Boxes stacked neatly, frozen food still secure. The sound didn't make sense. Nothing could move inside the trailer like that. My mind started spinning with possibilities, each worse than the last. I realized then that staying there, parked and stationary, made me an easy target. I needed to move, but moving too suddenly could trigger something unpredictable. So I did the only thing that seemed rational. I started the rig quietly. The engine's rumble filled the cab, and I eased the truck forward. He didn't react immediately, and for a moment I thought I might get away without confrontation. But then he moved. He stepped toward the road as if he was going to block me. My heart leapt into my throat. I hit the horn. It was loud, jarring in the empty night. He flinched, retreating slightly. I saw an opening. I shifted into gear and slowly, carefully, edged the rig onto the main highway. As soon as the tires hit the asphalt, I floored it. The headlights cut through the dark, and I didn't look back. The shadow at the rest stop didn't follow onto the road, at least not immediately. But the image stuck in my mind, and I could feel it clinging there like a weight. The miles ahead were long and tense. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something was following me. Every time a tree passed by, every time a dark stretch of road opened before me, I expected him to appear, blocking the rig, appearing out of nowhere. I stayed in the right lane, keeping the rig steady, watching my mirrors constantly, never allowing my speed to drop too low. My hands ached, my eyes burned, but I couldn't afford to stop. Hours passed. I finally made it to a larger interstate that led out of the hills. Traffic was heavier here, more cars, more lights, more eyes. That helped a little. I could relax slightly knowing that I wasn't completely alone anymore. My phone, which had been dead earlier, finally got service in a stretch where the hills opened up. I called dispatch and reported my situation, keeping my voice low, calm, but every word felt strained. They advised me to head straight to the nearest truck stop, park there, and wait for security if necessary. By the time I reached the truck stop, the sky was beginning to lighten with the first hints of dawn. I parked near the lot's entrance, next to a line of other trucks. There were people around, other drivers getting coffee, stretching their legs, moving about. I stayed inside, my hands wrapped around a cup of coffee, staring out the windshield. The shadow from the rest stop never appeared again, and there was no sign of a car hiding in the woods. I realized then how close I had been to a truly dangerous situation. I spent the rest of the morning at that truck stop, calling the company to explain the situation, logging the incident, and watching the other trucks come and go. Eventually, the adrenaline subsided, leaving behind a heavy exhaustion. But even as I drove on later that day, I couldn't stop thinking about the figure, the way he had waited, calm and deliberate, in the darkness. It had been real. There were no ghosts, no fairy tales, just the terrifying fact that some people watched and waited for opportunities to take advantage of others when they were most vulnerable. By the time I reached my delivery point in New Mexico, I was drained but safe. The cargo had arrived intact, the truck unscathed. I parked for the final time and stepped out into the open air, stretching my legs. The desert sun felt almost warm on my skin, a stark contrast to the dark, cold forest I had driven through days earlier. I reflected on the trip, the fear, and the reality of the road. As a trucker, you learn to respect the highway, not just for its dangers in traffic or weather, but for the people who inhabit it at night, who might be waiting for exactly the wrong moment to make their move. I felt a deep relief, but also a new kind of awareness. I knew I would drive again, of course. This is the life I had chosen, and the road was my home. But now I drove with sharper eyes, keener instincts, and a respect for the darkness that I hadn't fully understood before. The fear of that night stayed with me, but it also made me more careful, more alert, and more prepared. I didn't just survive the night, I learned from it. And that lesson, as harsh as it had been, was worth every uneasy mile. I had been trucking for over 15 years, and in all that time, I had seen my share of rough weather, dangerous roads, and people pushing their luck on the highways. But nothing I had ever experienced compared to what happened to me one late December night on a lonely stretch of highway in the Midwest. It was one of those routes that doesn't get much traffic, a back road that trucks like mine sometimes use to avoid the congested interstates. I had hauled plenty of loads down this highway before, but for some reason that night it felt different. The air was bitter cold, the sky a black so deep it seemed to swallow the headlights, and the wind carried a sharp, cutting edge that made even the heater in my cab struggle. I was hauling a refrigerated trailer full of frozen goods, a regular 40-foot load that didn't move too much, but it weighed heavily enough to make every turn, every hill, every dip in the road noticeable. I had started my drive in the early evening, leaving the warehouse behind the city, and had been on the road for nearly 6 hours. My route took me through small towns that seemed abandoned after dark and stretches of nothing but cornfields and woods. I kept a steady speed, careful not to overdo it on the ice-covered patches, my eyes scanning the black road ahead for deer or other hazards. It was around 2:30 a.m. when it started. I noticed a small movement at the edge of the road, a shadow flitting in the trees on the right. At first, I thought it was a deer, maybe a raccoon, anything normal. I slowed down slightly, giving my rig more room, watching carefully. But it wasn't an animal. I could see a figure standing by the roadside, motionless, dark clothes blending into the shadows. My first thought was someone stranded, maybe a hitchhiker or someone with car trouble. I don't pick up hitchhikers. I've been a trucker too long to trust strangers, but I kept my eyes on it as I drove by. The figure didn't move, didn't wave, didn't do anything. That was strange, but I shrugged it off, thinking maybe it was someone just standing there, lost. But then, a few miles down the road, I noticed it again. Same spot, same stance. I blinked, rubbed my eyes. Couldn't be. I had driven straight past. I tried to shake it off as my mind playing tricks in the dark, tired eyes staring into the shadows. Then the truck's lights flickered. Not a full outage, just a quick, jerky flicker that made the darkness around the road feel even deeper. The trailer shivered on its suspension. I gripped the wheel tighter, heart thumping harder. I had my CB radio, my cell phone, but out here the signal was weak. Sometimes there was none. That part of the highway was infamous for dead zones, places where no one could hear a call for help. I kept going, careful to stay centered in my lane, watching the road. Minutes later, it appeared again. The figure. This time, it was on the left side of the highway, standing in the middle of the shoulder, completely still. I had to swerve slightly to avoid hitting it. My stomach dropped. There was no way it could have moved so fast. I knew I hadn't passed it, then had it appear on the other side. My mind tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was another person. Maybe there were more people standing along the highway, spaced apart. My pulse throbbed in my temples as I kept my eyes forward, trying not to panic. The temperature outside dropped suddenly, sharper than before. Frost began forming on the edges of my windshield. I could see my breath inside the cab, small clouds of condensation as I exhaled. The heater was running full blast, but it didn't make a dent in the cold that seemed to seep from outside the truck. The kind of cold that makes you feel like it's pressing against your bones. Then the first sound came. It was faint at first, a dragging noise, metallic, like something heavy scraping against asphalt. I glanced in my mirrors, scanning both sides, but the road was empty. I could feel the tension building in my chest. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tight that my knuckles whitened. My mind ran through all the possible explanations. Fallen branches, a metal signpost scraping in the wind, but the sound had a rhythm, a deliberate drag that didn't match the road conditions. I pressed the CB button. Any trucks out there? Static answered me. Nothing else. I tried again, voice steadier than I felt. Silence. I knew the next stretch of road would take me through a long curve surrounded by trees, a blind corner that had claimed trucks before. I forced myself to keep my speed steady, my headlights cutting through the darkness as far as they could. The dragging sound came again, louder this time. It seemed to echo in the trees, bouncing from left to right. I could feel the vibrations through the seat. The tires hummed against the asphalt, the truck responding to every tiny twitch of the wheel. And then I saw it. The figure was standing in the middle of the road, directly ahead. No shoulder, no warning, just standing there like it had always been there. My heart froze. I slammed on the brakes, tires screeching against ice and frost. The rig swerved slightly, the trailer fishtailing, and for a moment, I thought I was going to lose control. But somehow, instinct, years of driving, kicked in. I countersteered, managing to keep the truck on the asphalt. My chest heaved, sweat mixing with the chill on my neck. By the time I got the truck straight, the figure was gone. No trace, no sound, nothing. My heart raced, my hands shaking so badly I had to pull over on the shoulder to regain control. I sat there for a few minutes, the engine idling, trying to convince myself I was seeing things. Exhaust steamed in the freezing air, curling up in the cab's mirrors. I tried to call again, my cell struggling for a signal. Nothing. I decided to keep going. Couldn't stop here. Stopping meant being vulnerable, and whatever it wasn't just a person. Felt wrong, dangerous. I pressed the accelerator, keeping my eyes glued to the road. The rest of the drive was a tense blur. Every shadow at the edge of the headlights made my stomach turn. Every animal crossing felt like a trap. The dragging sound never came back, but the feeling of being watched lingered like a heavy weight in the cab. Around 5 a.m., the horizon began to lighten. Not full daylight, just a pale gray that made the world look washed out. Relief flooded me in waves, but so did exhaustion. I was trembling, hands still tight on the wheel. I passed a gas station on the edge of a small town, a tiny blinking neon sign that promised warmth and safety. I pulled in immediately, shut off the engine, and just sat there, staring at the road behind me. Everything felt surreal, like I had been in some kind of nightmare that had dragged on for hours. The clerk inside the gas station gave me a suspicious look when I came in to pay for coffee, my hands still shaking, eyes red from staring at the road all night. I didn't explain, just paid and sat at a corner table, the heater warming my numb fingers. I thought about what had happened, replaying every moment. Every rational explanation I could think of, drunk drivers, hallucinations, sleep deprivation, didn't feel right. Something about it had been deliberate, precise, like whoever or whatever was watching me. I got back on the road once the sky brightened enough to see clearly. Daylight was like a shield. The shadows no longer moved at the edges of my vision. The silence was normal. The highway was empty, peaceful even. But the memory of those hours stayed with me. I drove slower, kept the truck closer to the center of the lane, and didn't relax until I reached the main interstate, where other trucks and cars made the world feel less threatening. After that night, I never drove that stretch of road again. I learned later from a local news article that there had been a series of robberies targeting truckers on that highway around the same time. Small towns, remote stretches, people using the darkness to their advantage. They had figured out the patterns of trucks carrying goods at night, and sometimes they even staged figures or obstructions to force trucks to stop or swerve. I hadn't seen a weapon, hadn't interacted with anyone, but the figure, the dragging sounds, it all made sense in that light. It had been a setup. I had been lucky, very lucky. I kept trucking for years after, but I avoided that highway. And every time I'm on a lonely stretch at night, when the wind is cutting and the headlights barely reach beyond the next curve, I remember that December night. I remember the figure standing in the darkness, the dragging sounds that never had a source I could see, the black road stretching endlessly ahead. And I remember the feeling of survival, the knowledge that one small mistake on that road could have ended everything. I made it through that night, and I made it back to daylight, back to safety, and back to the routine I trusted. But it changed me. Every night drive now carries a careful suspicion, a constant readiness, because I know that sometimes the darkness isn't just darkness. It's a warning. From that night on, I double-check my route, I make sure my phone has signal before heading into remote areas, and I keep my eyes sharp. I keep my truck in top condition, brakes checked, tires new, lights bright. And even though I've told myself that what I experienced was just a criminal setup, a planned scare, I can't help the lingering thought every time I drive alone at night. Someone could still be out there, waiting, and I might not see them until it's too late. But I survived that night, and I survived the next ones, and the next ones after that. I learned to respect the road, respect the darkness, and respect the fact that being a trucker isn't just about driving. It's about surviving, keeping your head, and making it home. I've been driving trucks for over 15 years, and I thought I had seen just about everything the road could throw at me. I've dealt with storms, high winds, ice on mountain passes, crazy drivers, and long stretches of lonely highway where it felt like no one in the world existed but me. But nothing in all that time prepared me for that one run, that one night that left me staring at the dash for hours afterward, trying to convince myself I hadn't imagined the danger I had driven through. It started on a Tuesday. I had a load of machinery I needed to deliver from a small warehouse in the Midwest to a construction site across the state. It was a big rig, fully loaded, heavy, and awkward, but nothing unusual. I planned my route, checked the truck thoroughly, filled the fuel tanks, and made sure the brakes, tires, and lights were all in perfect condition. Safety first, always. By the time I left the lot, it was mid-afternoon, and the sun was starting to dip toward the horizon. I was used to driving at night, so I didn't mind the early darkness. The route took me down a stretch of highway that narrowed and twisted as it cut through a series of hills and farmland. The road was mostly empty, which I liked. Less traffic meant I could move at a steady pace without having to constantly adjust. The sky had a strange gray tone to it as I climbed over the first hill. Not storm gray, but a dull, heavy gray that made the landscape feel flat and colorless. I remember thinking it looked almost like a black and white photograph stretched out across miles of land. I drove for hours, passing the occasional farm, a lone barn, or a small cluster of houses. The further I went, the more isolated the road became. Streetlights disappeared, replaced by the soft glow of my headlights. By the time night fully set in, I was deep in a stretch of road where there wasn't a single gas station or building for 20, maybe 30 miles. That's when the first sign of trouble showed itself. I noticed a car in the distance, a small, dark sedan, sitting oddly on the side of the road. First, I thought maybe it had broken down, but something about the way it sat there, angled slightly toward the ditch, made me uneasy. Its lights were off and it didn't move as I passed. I glanced in the mirror, just to check, and saw the car still there, though my headlights didn't reach it for more than a second. Nothing about it seemed normal, but I shrugged it off. People left their cars by the side of the road all the time. The next hour was uneventful, except for a creeping sense of being watched. I kept checking the mirrors, watching the empty road behind me. The darkness felt thick, heavier than it should have, like it was pressing against the truck. Every time I thought about it, I shook it off. I've driven alone at night countless times. Nothing unusual about that. Then came the fog. It rolled in slowly at first, a thin haze that blurred the edges of the road and the lights ahead. I slowed down, turned on the fog lights, and kept my speed steady. But the fog thickened with terrifying speed, reducing visibility to maybe 20 feet in front of the truck. My headlights cut through only a short distance, leaving the rest of the road hidden in a gray wall. I had no choice but to slow down even further, down to about 25 miles per hour. That's when the road changed. I don't mean the curves or the hills. I mean the pavement itself. I noticed the lines on the road looked fresh, too fresh. The paint gleamed in my headlights, and it didn't match the old lines I'd passed earlier. The shoulders of the road were uneven, rough, and rocky in some places. My tires scraped against them as I tried to keep the truck centered. Something about it didn't feel right. As I rounded a bend, I saw it, a shadow low to the ground, moving across the fog. My first thought was an animal, maybe a deer or a stray dog, but this was wrong. The movement was slow, deliberate, too smooth, almost mechanical. I slammed on the brakes, and the truck screeched against the wet asphalt. My heart was pounding, my hands gripping the wheel so tight they hurt. The shadow vanished as quickly as it appeared, swallowed by the fog. I forced myself to breathe. Just an animal, nothing more. The next stretch of road became worse. Every turn, every hill, every curve felt like a trap. I kept imagining shapes moving at the edge of the lights, rocks that hadn't been there a second ago. A figure standing still in the middle of the lane for a split second before vanishing into the fog. I knew my mind was playing tricks, but the tension was relentless. My eyes burned from staring so hard into the fog. My muscles ached from holding the steering wheel in a death grip. Then I saw the next car. Pickup truck, old, rusted, headlights on. It was parked oddly in the middle of the lane, facing the wrong way. No hazard lights, nothing. I had to swerve onto the shoulder to avoid it, tires crunching over loose gravel and dirt. My heart was in my throat. The truck sat there, engine off like it was waiting. I glanced around the area, fog swirling, but no one was there. I swallowed hard and forced myself to keep moving, telling myself it had to be abandoned. I drove for what felt like hours through that nightmare stretch. Every mile I passed, I felt more tense, more alert, more convinced that something was out there watching. And maybe it was, maybe it wasn't. I'll never know for sure. The fog finally began to thin as I approached a small town, a place with a few lights, a gas station that was still open. I wanted nothing more than to stop, park the truck, and sit there until morning. But I had a delivery deadline, and I didn't dare risk being late. By the time I pulled into the town, I realized my hands were shaking. I could barely lift my coffee cup at the truck stop, my fingers trembling. I sat in the cab for a long while after refueling, staring out at the dark road I had just driven. The fog was gone here, normal night air surrounding the lit streets. But the tension didn't leave me. I could still feel the weight of it, the shadow of fear that had followed me down that road. I stayed in that town overnight, parked the truck in a secure lot, made sure the load was locked, and tried to calm down. Sleep didn't come easy. Every sound outside the window made me flinch. Every passing car felt like a threat. I thought about what I had driven through, that stretch of road, the abandoned vehicles, the shadows, and the shapes in the fog. It didn't make sense. Nothing about it added up. I kept thinking maybe it was a bad stretch of highway, maybe something illegal had happened there recently, maybe there were people who shouldn't have been out there. But nothing concrete, just fear and tension. The next morning, I continued the trip. Daylight had a way of dissolving the tension, of making the world feel normal again. The rest of the drive went without incident. I delivered the machinery safely, parked the truck at the company lot, and filed my paperwork. When I got home, I checked news reports, social media, forums for truckers, looking for anyone who had been on that road recently. Nothing. No accidents, no reports of abandoned vehicles, no mention of any strange occurrences. I felt relief, but also a nagging sense of unease, a reminder that what I had experienced might be invisible to the world. It stayed with me for weeks. I avoided that stretch of road whenever possible. I drove alternate routes even if they added hours to the trip. Every time I thought about it, the images of the fog, the shadow, and the abandoned pickup truck pressed against the back of my mind. I never told anyone. People would call me crazy or paranoid, and maybe part of me still wondered if I had imagined some of it. But the fear had been real, the tension had been real, and I had survived. Months later, I heard from a colleague that the road had been repaved recently, that they had discovered old vehicles abandoned along the roadside during the construction. Nothing dangerous, just junk and old cars. But the placement of them, combined with the thick fog that rolled in that night, had created illusions. Shadows moving in the fog, shapes appearing at the edge of vision, objects I couldn't clearly identify. It made sense. That, and the stress of long hours driving, had amplified my perception. I remember that night vividly, even now. The fear, the tension, the sheer uncertainty of what might be ahead. It taught me something important. The road is unpredictable. Even when nothing is out of place, even when everything seems normal, things can feel wrong. And sometimes, survival isn't about escaping monsters or ghosts. It's about paying attention, staying calm, and trusting your skills. I don't drive that stretch anymore. I take the longer route even if it costs me time and fuel. I make sure the truck is checked, brakes, tires, lights, all of it. I drive alert, I drive careful, and I carry the memory of that night with me. Not as terror exactly, but as a reminder that reality can be frightening enough. And in the end, that's all you can do. Drive carefully, watch the road, and survive. It might sound simple, almost boring compared to other stories. But the truth is, that night was a reminder that danger doesn't always roar. Sometimes, it just waits quietly in the fog, in the shadows, in the empty road ahead, and you only realize it when you're already in the middle of it. I survived. That's the ending. Not heroic, not dramatic. Just careful, measured survival. And that's the way it is on the road sometimes. The highway doesn't care about your fears, and it doesn't bend for you. It's up to you to navigate it, day or night, fog or clear skies, and make it through. I never liked driving through the back roads at night, but that night I didn't have a choice. The company had called me in for an emergency haul, and it was one of those jobs where you can't say no. Not if you want to keep your route, your reputation, and your pay. The load wasn't heavy, just some machinery parts, but the route they gave me was a nightmare. It wasn't on any major highway. It was one of those rural shortcuts that truckers always hear about in stories, the kind people warn each other about over CB radios. The sun had just set when I left the depot. It was December, and the air had that sharp bite that immediately made the inside of the cab feel warm in contrast. My rig was a 2019 Kenworth, old by some standards but solid. I liked her because she handled well in tough conditions, and tonight I would need every bit of that. The load was strapped down tight, the trailer quiet behind me as I eased onto the empty road. There was no traffic at all, just me and the stretch of blacktop that disappeared into the dark. The first hour was uneventful, the way most drives are in the country at night. I kept my eyes on the road and my hands tight on the wheel, my mind half in the routine of driving, half thinking about how I'd be back in my own bed in a few hours. Then the sun was gone completely, and all I had was the dim glow of my headlights cutting through the night and the occasional blink of a distant farm light. That's when the unease started. The road narrowed suddenly, turning into a two-lane strip of asphalt that cracked and pitted with age. My rig felt heavier here, and I had to slow to a crawl around sharp bends that rose over small hills. There was no shoulder, just dense woods pressing close on either side, black shadows that seemed to lean toward the truck. I couldn't see beyond the reach of my headlights, and the idea of hitting something or someone out here was terrifying. Trucks have blind spots, even with mirrors adjusted perfectly. I reminded myself to drive slower, keep my focus, and listen for the hum of tires on asphalt, any sound out of place. Then I heard it, the first sound that really got my attention. A tapping, rhythmic, almost like a branch hitting the side of my trailer. At first, I told myself it was just the wind, or maybe a loose strap on the load. I pulled over to check. I got out, cold air hitting my face hard, and walked along the trailer. The straps were tight, the machinery didn't move an inch. Nothing was out of place. I walked back to the cab, heart pounding. Maybe I was imagining it. Maybe the woods were just noisy at night. I climbed back in, started the engine, and drove on. The tapping stopped, or I couldn't hear it over the rumble of the diesel. I tried to shake it off, focused on the road. That's when I noticed the headlights behind me. At first, I thought it was another truck, which wasn't unusual even on back roads. But then I realized it wasn't moving like a normal truck. It stayed the same distance behind me no matter how fast I went, creeping along like a shadow glued to my bumper. I turned on my CB and called, "Anyone out there?" No response. The signal was weak here. Dead zones are common in these back roads. I tried my phone, no signal. That's when a small knot of panic began to form. My trucker instincts kicked in. Something wasn't right, and I needed to keep moving until I found a proper road. A highway, somewhere with lights, people. The road twisted again, the hill steeper, and I noticed something else. Every time I glanced at the rearview mirror, The headlights weren't just behind me. They seemed closer than they should be, almost too close, too steady, too purposeful. I tried not to panic, reminding myself that at night, lights can play tricks on your eyes. But the feeling didn't leave. I kept driving, careful around curves, heart hammering. The tapping returned, faint, now from somewhere inside the trailer. My breath caught. I had checked the load, machinery heavy, bolted down. Nothing could make that sound unless something or someone was inside. But that made no sense. I had sealed the trailer, doors locked, nothing left open. And yet, there it was. I thought about stopping to call the police, but where? No signal, no other cars. If something was following me, stopping could make it worse. My only option was to keep moving. I adjusted the mirror, tried to focus on driving, and kept my eyes on the road. That's when I saw it, a figure at the edge of the trees. Just a glimpse, pale, thin, standing perfectly still, watching. I slammed on the brakes, almost jackknifing the trailer, heart in my throat. But when I looked again, nothing. Just the black trees and the empty road. My mind raced. This road wasn't well-traveled, and the area had stories, rumors of dangerous people living off the grid, of highway attacks in remote spots. I didn't want to believe it, but logic screamed at me that I could be in serious trouble. I started calculating my options. Turn back? Not possible. The road was winding, leading deeper into the forest. Speed up? Maybe, but if the person or people were following, that might provoke them. My stomach churned. I tried to steady myself. I focused on the wheel, on the hum of the engine, on counting the lines on the road. Every time I glanced at the mirror, my heart jumped. The headlights weren't there now. Maybe they had turned off. Maybe it was all in my head. But my relief was short-lived. Another tap, loud this time, from the trailer. I slammed on the brakes again. This wasn't normal. I couldn't rationalize it. I pulled over, leaving the cab running, flashlight in hand. The darkness pressed around me as I walked the length of the trailer. The tapping had stopped, but the hair on my arms stood up. Every crackle of the frozen leaves underfoot sounded like gunfire. I circled the rig, shining the light under the trailer. Around the wheels, every shadow. Nothing. The straps were tight. The cargo hadn't shifted. Nothing moved. I climbed back in, sweat pouring down my face despite the freezing air. I decided to keep going. The only plan I had was to reach the next highway. I didn't know how far it was, but the GPS said maybe another 30 minutes if I could keep speed up. My hands gripped the wheel so tightly my knuckles were white. The tapping never returned, but the feeling of being followed didn't leave. Then the worst thing happened. Out of nowhere, a car swerved into the road ahead, headlights blinding, moving erratically. I slammed on the brakes, honking the horn, skidding slightly on the slick asphalt. The car spun and hit the ditch, flipping once before coming to rest. Smoke rose from the engine. I stayed in my cab for a moment, too shocked to move, heart hammering in my chest. I got out, careful, and approached the car. It was empty. No driver, no passengers. Nothing. Just a car, smoking, abandoned in the middle of the night. I checked the road around it, the woods, everything. Nothing. I climbed back into the truck, confused, scared, the adrenaline making my hands shake. I realized then that the woods, the tapping, the figure, the headlights following. Maybe it wasn't someone. Maybe it was some people's trick. Maybe someone had staged this road to scare drivers, or maybe it was just a coincidence of abandoned cars and shadows. But the road wasn't done with me yet. About 10 minutes later, my rig started shaking violently. At first, I thought I hit a pothole, but the shaking continued, growing worse. I pulled over again, heart racing. I checked the tires, the axles, everything. Then I saw it. One of the trailer tires was shredded, rim dragging on asphalt. I cursed under my breath, pulling out the spare, the jack, and the tools. Changing a trailer tire at night on a dark, narrow, deserted road is terrifying. Every sound in the forest felt amplified. Every rustle made me jump. By the time I finished, I was exhausted, cold and tense. My hands were raw from the jack, my arms sore from lifting the spare. I got back in, turned on the heater, and tried to steady my breathing. That's when I saw headlights in the distance again. Slow, deliberate, coming toward me this time. I considered hiding, pulling off into the trees, but there was no place to go. The vehicle came closer, and I realized it wasn't turning off the road. Then I saw the outline of a man stepping out, waving a flashlight. Relief hit me in a wave. This wasn't some malicious stalker, it was a local, a tow truck. The man waved me over, motioning to help. I realized I had been driving blind, panicking, imagining the worst, and that help was here all along. The tow truck driver explained that the area was notorious for accidents, and the abandoned car I saw was from a wreck earlier that night. The tapping I heard? Just the machinery shifting slightly on the icy road. The figure in the trees? Probably a deer or a trick of the light. My imagination had turned everything into a nightmare. He towed my rig to the next town, making sure I got on the highway safely. I stayed awake the whole way, staring out the window, heart still racing. When I finally reached a proper truck stop, I parked, checked the rig again, and finally allowed myself to breathe. The road hadn't been haunted. No one had been following me. It was just the dark, the isolation, and my mind turning small problems into huge threats in the middle of the night. I slept in the cab that night, heater running, coffee in hand, grateful for the lights of the truck stop. By morning, the fear had faded, leaving only exhaustion and relief. I realized something that night I never forgot. In trucking, the danger isn't always in monsters or criminals. Sometimes it's in the road, the isolation, and your own mind playing tricks when the night is too dark and the road too long. I finished the delivery that afternoon, took every major highway the rest of the way, and refused to take another back road at night for years. That drive stayed with me. Not because someone tried to hurt me, but because I realized how quickly fear could take over when you're alone, tired, and in the middle of nowhere. And in trucking, nowhere can be more terrifying than you imagine. I've been a trucker for nearly 2 decades, hauling freight across highways that stretch endlessly through deserts, mountains, and forgotten back roads. You get used to being alone in the cab, your own thoughts filling the silence, the hum of the engine beneath you, the occasional flicker of headlights from passing cars, and the constant weight of the night pressing down on everything around you. I've had my share of close calls, bad weather, mechanical failures, and tight schedules that made every mile feel like a risk. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared me for what happened that night. It was mid-October, the kind of late fall evening where the air is crisp, sharp, and carries that bitter smell of decaying leaves and damp asphalt. I had been on the road for nearly 12 hours, leaving a warehouse in rural Wyoming just after lunch. My load was standard: a refrigerated container full of packaged meat, temperature-sensitive, heavy, and expensive. The route had me following Highway 16 for nearly 200 miles, a stretch that cuts through dense forests and rolling hills, little towns scattered along the way like afterthoughts. I liked this stretch because it was quiet, predictable, and rarely crowded with big rigs. That evening, though, the usual tranquility felt off. There was a strange weight to the air, a subtle tension in the shadows of the trees lining the road. By 8 p.m., darkness had fallen completely. My headlights cut through the night, illuminating only a small slice of road ahead. The radio was dead static, which didn't surprise me. Cell service vanished hours ago. My fatigue was building, gnawing at my focus. I checked the dashboard. Fuel was fine, temperature gauge steady, tires inflated, brakes responsive. Everything was normal. I kept my speed steady around 55 miles per hour, which was slow for the truck. But this road was narrow and winding in parts, and I didn't want to push it. About an hour later, I passed through a section of highway bordered on both sides by thick pine forests. There were no streetlights, no other cars, just the occasional curve and the constant dark. I noticed something out of the corner of my eye, a pair of dim red lights flickering along the shoulder. At first, I thought it was a tail light from another car parked illegally, but as I approached, I realized there was no car. Just 2 small lights, maybe a bike or some kind of reflector, but no reflective clothing, No movement, nothing but a strange, unsettling shimmer in the darkness. My stomach tightened, but I shrugged it off. People left hazards on the road. Maybe someone had a broken-down vehicle hidden in the trees. I moved cautiously around it. Then I started hearing it. A tapping, faint at first, like someone knocking on metal. I looked in the mirrors, scanning the sides of the trailer, thinking a branch had brushed against the side. The sound didn't stop. In fact, it got louder, rhythmic, persistent. My pulse quickened. I eased off the accelerator, trying to isolate the sound, my eyes darting to the mirrors, to the road behind. Anything. The highway stretched in both directions, completely empty. Yet that tapping continued, like metal fingernails rapping against the frame of the trailer. I hit the brakes lightly, just enough to slow down without jerking the load, but the sound didn't change. Followed me. Panic began to edge in. My mind started running through the scenarios. Animals, maybe? A branch caught under the wheel? Or worse, someone trying to sabotage me? I looked into the side mirrors again and finally saw it. A figure, crouched on the edge of the road, pale, hunched, moving in a way that made no sense. Not running, not walking, just gliding, sticking unnaturally close to the ground. I slammed my foot to the accelerator, the engine roaring as I forced the truck past. My hands gripped the wheel until my knuckles went white. The figure didn't react. It didn't flee. It just stayed there, following my progress, perfectly in line with the trailer, moving along with me impossibly fast. I checked the speedometer. 55, 60, 65 miles per hour. The figure kept pace. My heart was hammering, sweat stinging my eyes as I cursed under my breath. I wasn't a man easily shaken, but at that moment, I felt every instinct screaming to survive. I flicked on my high beams, hoping to scare it off, but the light only made it clearer. A person, yes, but distorted somehow, dressed in dark, ragged clothing, skin grayish, hair plastered to its head. Its eyes, or what I assumed were eyes, caught the light briefly, reflecting like dull mirrors. I had no choice but to keep driving, to put distance between myself and this impossible thing on the side of the road. I took the next curve carefully, hugging the inside lane, praying for another vehicle to appear, any sign of life, but the road was desolate. The tapping sound had returned, louder, now accompanied by heavy breathing I couldn't quite place. It was behind the trailer, maybe on the roof? I had no idea. My stomach churned as I forced myself to focus on the road, trying to keep control of the truck. My mind ran through options. Call for help? My phone had no service. Turn around? Impossible on this stretch of narrow highway. Pull off to the shoulder? That might work if the figure would give me the space, but it wasn't giving space, it was keeping pace, sliding in perfect unison with my truck. That defiance of natural movement, of physics even, terrified me more than anything else. The next 10 minutes felt like an eternity. Every mile I thought I'd finally lost it, but then it appeared again at every bend, every straightaway. I gripped the wheel, trying to ignore the adrenaline shaking my arms. My mind raced with memories of survival training, defensive driving, anything I could use to plan my next move. I knew that my only chance was to reach a town, somewhere with lights, cameras, people, any human presence that could help me. But the map on my GPS, half-loaded thanks to the weak signal, showed nothing for at least 20 more miles. 20 miles in the dark, with something moving alongside me like it was born to stalk trucks. My chest ached with panic, my thoughts a jumble of disbelief and fear. How was this happening? Why was this happening? And why only to me? Then, as if it decided to escalate, the tapping turned into something worse. The trailer shuddered as if hit by a heavy object. My hands flew to the wheel, the truck fishtailing slightly. My heart nearly stopped. I realized it was jumping, climbing. I could see the faint outline of it on the rearview mirror, scaling the back of the trailer with unnatural speed and strength. My mind screamed for me to stop, but my instincts told me to accelerate, to outrun whatever it was. I hit the gas. The truck roared. The tires screamed against the asphalt. The shaking intensified, objects in the cab rattling. my coffee cup spilling onto the floor. I glanced again. The figure had reached the top of the trailer. Somehow, impossibly, it had climbed over the back and was now crouched there, silhouetted against the dim light of the dashboard, motionless. I almost veered off the road, trying to comprehend it. It stayed there as I drove, a grotesque statue on the roof, riding my truck. I knew then that trying to reason with it or even comprehend what it was would get me killed. My only thought was escape. I had to reach the town, to reach a populated area. My route took me downhill toward a small valley, the kind of place with one road threading through farms and scattered houses. As I approached, I realized the descent was steep, sharp turns coming up. I had a choice: keep the speed to outrun it or slow down to handle the curves. I made the choice that, looking back, probably saved my life. I slowed. I hugged the inside lane on every turn, braking carefully, focusing on keeping the truck upright. The figure remained on top, not sliding off, not trying to reach me. It just followed. My exhaustion was absolute. Every sense was screaming. My hands burned from gripping the wheel. My back ached from tension. My stomach tied in knots. And yet I kept moving. Finally, I saw the first flicker of lights ahead. A small gas station, open 24 hours, neon buzzing. Salvation. I headed straight for it, taking the last few curves with extreme caution. As I entered the station, I hit the brakes hard, the tires squealing, the trailer fishtailing slightly but regaining control. The figure on top, for the first time, reacted differently. It jumped, or maybe fell, onto the gravel just beyond the pumps. I was frozen in the cab for a moment, watching it land perfectly, crouched low like a predator assessing me. It didn't advance. It didn't move. It just stood there. The lights from the station illuminated it fully. Ragged clothing, unremarkable face now. Just a man, dirty, thin, sunken eyes, but alive. No supernatural abilities, no impossible physics. Just a man. A man with strength, persistence, and intent. He looked small under the harsh fluorescent lighting, human after all. But he had been terrifying because he had no fear, no hesitation, and he had stalked me across miles with the patience of a predator. I stayed in the truck, engine running, until the attendants noticed the rig and called the local police. When they arrived, the man was gone. Tracks in the gravel suggested he had slipped away into the surrounding forest while I was parked at the pumps. The officers took statements, checked the truck. Nothing was missing, nothing damaged. They said he might have been a drifter, someone watching the roads, looking for victims. No one really knew. I was shaken to my core. My mind replayed every moment. The tapping, the silhouette on the roof, the impossible endurance. I had expected some supernatural terror, some impossible entity, but it was just a man. That made it worse. Real life can be more terrifying than any ghost or monster because it's unpredictable, relentless, and human. I ended up completing my delivery the next day, a nervous wreck, watching every curve, every shadow, every patch of darkness along the road. I kept my speed under control, lights blazing, radio on. The memory of that night never left me. I still drive those highways, but I no longer feel the solitude as comfort. I see the shadows differently now, listen to tapping in the distance, imagine figures moving in the darkness. I learned a simple truth that night. Fear doesn't always come from the unreal. Sometimes it comes from the patience, persistence, and resolve of another human being. And when that human decides you are their prey, there is nothing you can do but run and hope to reach safety. Even now, years later, I can close my eyes and see that figure crouched along the road. The way it moved alongside the trailer, silent but determined. The memory is burned into me. I drive with caution now, always aware, always scanning the edges of the road, every reflective surface, every dark curve. And every night, when the wind howls through the cab, when a shadow flickers just beyond my headlights, I remember that night, and I know how close I came to being just another victim lost in the long stretch of highway, swallowed by darkness, and hunted by someone with nothing but patience and intent. It started as a routine trip like any other. I was hauling a load of refrigerated goods from Kansas City down to Phoenix, a long stretch of highway that could take me almost 20 hours if I pushed straight through. I had been driving trucks for over 15 years, enough to know that the road was a living thing. It could surprise you, wear you down, and sometimes terrify you in ways you never expected. But I liked that about it. I liked the isolation, the control, the rhythm of the engine beneath me. It was just me, the rig, and the road. Nothing more, nothing less. I left Kansas City just before sunrise, the horizon burning orange and pink. The first few hours were uneventful. I drove past fields of corn and soybeans, the air crisp and cold against the windshield. The rig hummed along smoothly. I took the interstates out of the city, careful of other drivers, the weight of the trailer making sudden maneuvers risky. My radio crackled occasionally with the low hum of CB chatter, mostly other truckers swapping locations, road conditions, and the occasional mundane complaint about traffic or weather. I didn't talk much back. The hum of the truck, the vibration through the steering wheel, and the smell of diesel were my constant companions. By mid-morning, I had made it through Missouri and crossed into Oklahoma. The landscape had changed. Rolling hills gave way to flatter plains, and the sky felt wider. I stopped briefly at a rest area just past Tulsa. The place was nearly empty, which I appreciated. I filled up the diesel, stretched my legs, and checked the load. The temperature in the refrigerated trailer was stable, and the locks were secure. That was always a little reassurance, knowing that the cargo I carried was safe. The day dragged on, and by the time I reached the Oklahoma-Texas border, the sun was already beginning to dip. I had planned to stop in Amarillo for the night, but the closer I got, the more I realized that something about the day felt off. The roads were quieter than usual. Not completely empty, but quieter. Less traffic always makes me uneasy, though I tried to shake it off as just coincidence. I was cruising along a stretch of Highway 287 when I saw it. A car parked on the shoulder, headlights off, in the shadow of a hill. At first, I didn't think much of it. People break down all the time. But as I passed, I saw a figure crouched by the driver's side, moving strangely. I slowed slightly, my eyes narrowing, but the figure didn't move once I got closer. I shook my head and tried to push the unease away. Maybe it was someone fixing a flat tire or dealing with an engine problem. Night fell completely by the time I hit the Texas Panhandle. Darkness out here wasn't like driving near cities. There were no streetlights, no glowing signs in the distance, nothing but the dim glow of the moon and the faint reflection of my headlights on the asphalt. The road stretched endlessly ahead, a ribbon of gray cutting through the flat black. It was beautiful in a way, but also unsettling. Every mile felt longer. Every shadow seemed to twitch in the corner of my eye. Then it started. The truck began making a faint, irregular sound from the rear wheels, a rhythmic thump that hadn't been there before. At first, I thought it was a piece of the trailer settling, or maybe something on the tires. I checked the mirrors. Everything seemed fine. The load was still secure, the trailer straight, but the thumping wouldn't go away. It became louder, sharper, more insistent. My stomach sank. I had learned over the years that strange noises in a rig were rarely harmless. I pulled into the next rest stop, a small, nearly deserted area with just enough light to see the pumps and the cracked asphalt. I climbed down from the cab and walked around the trailer, flashlight in hand. The tires looked fine. No debris caught in the wheels, no visible damage. I tapped on the rims, shook the tires, and tried to listen carefully. That's when I saw it. A large, deep gouge in the metal side of the trailer, near the left rear wheel. Not massive, but enough to worry me. It looked fresh, like something had scraped against it hard. I cursed under my breath. The trailer was rented from the company, not mine personally. Damage like this could cost me. I inspected the rest of the rig. Everything seemed okay. I couldn't find any other obvious signs of damage. Still, the thumping continued. I decided I had no choice but to drive carefully, at reduced speed, and make it to Amarillo. The highway stretched on, dark and empty. I could see nothing but the faint lines on the asphalt and the occasional reflection of my lights on road signs. Hours passed. The thumping noise became more erratic. Sometimes it was rhythmic, like a heartbeat. Sometimes it skipped a beat, then resumed. My mind started to play tricks on me. Was something stuck under the trailer? Was a wheel failing? I checked the mirrors constantly, feeling the sweat on the back of my neck. Somewhere in the middle of nowhere, the thumping stopped abruptly. I slowed to a crawl, scanning the road behind me. Nothing. I exhaled, feeling a bit of relief, until I realized that the temperature gauge for the trailer had started fluctuating wildly. One moment it read the proper temperature. The next it jumped 10 degrees, then dropped back. My stomach sank. Refrigerated goods could spoil fast if the temperature went too high. I had to get this checked immediately. I spotted a small town off the highway, barely more than a cluster of buildings and a gas station. I pulled in slowly, careful not to damage the rig further. The place looked deserted. Lights flickered in the gas station, but there was no sign of life outside. I killed the engine and climbed down to inspect the trailer again. Everything looked fine from the outside. Tires intact, trailer straight, no visible leaks. I wiped sweat from my brow. Something was wrong, though. I could feel it. I went inside the gas station, hoping for some help. The bell above the door jingled faintly, but the interior was empty. Shelves were stocked, but there was no clerk. I looked around. Nothing. My unease grew. I checked my phone. No signal. Not a single bar. Great. Just what I needed. Stranded in a ghost town at night with a potentially damaged trailer.